The agenda this week assessed the rise of robots in the workplace and pondered the renewed popularity of some classics of dystopian literature. We begin the agenda's week in review on the road in London, Ontario, with a look at the economic and social challenges facing a region in flux. You may have noted, if you've been following the news, that the Prime Minister of Canada has been overseas. He was in Germany, where he gave a significant speech in Hamburg just the other day. We want to play a little piece of that speech, and then we'll come back and chat, okay? Sheldon, let's roll the clip.
Citizens around the world and across the political spectrum are looking for guidance. They're looking for leadership. They're looking for hope. And so far, they're feeling a little let down. When companies post record profits on the backs of workers consistently refused full-time work and the job security that comes with it, people get defeated. And when governments serve special interests instead of the interests of the citizens who elected them, people lose faith. Increasing inequality has made citizens distrust their governments, distrust their employers. It turns into us versus them. And we're watching that anxiety transform into anger on an almost daily basis.
Let me follow up on that. Glenn, you heard the words anger and anxiety and mistrust. Are you seeing evidence of that in London today?
All over the place. It doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think there's lots of reaction to, as Joshua talked about, regional and global stuff that's going on. But it is my sense that people are much more dissatisfied than they have been in the past. And I think it's important to remember, too, that in places like London, we actually have a test of that coming up soon. We have a London plan, which would be a new official plan if it gets approved for the next 3 decades or so. And, we have a situation here where citizens who fought for that are angry because they want to see it implemented. And there's some others in London that are holding that process up a bit by an appeal process. And I think what you're going to see in London, this kind of fat cat city as people used to see it, it's actually not that. There's a lot of tumult, a lot of turbulence going on, of people having the kind of quality of life that they're looking for. And it'll come out in places like this London plan thing and others. So no, London's not some sleepy bedroom community that's just watching that happening elsewhere. It's happening here.
Susan, that kind of mistrust and anger, are you seeing evidence of it?
Oh, absolutely. And in my line of work, where I do a lot of employment law, what's really fascinating to me is I'm seeing often people who are working in certain companies and industries that are suddenly taken over by normally American corporations, and the culture within the company shifts dramatically. And so there are a lot of homegrown, large London corporations that are suddenly changing in response to the ongoing cuts and maximizing profits at the expense of the frontline workers. And I see people come to my office in despair. They've been working in the same company for 20, 30 years, being shown the door with outrageously tiny packages. And there's a sense of betrayal. And that's the most interesting part of me, in part of my line of work, is seeing how personal it is. Because of course it's personal. You've put your heart and soul into the same job, and all of a sudden they just take that away from you without any regard for all of what you've invested in that company.
Josh, it puts enormous pressure on people who are in public life like you to come up with answers for those kinds of questions. Are you able to?
Well, it will be a partnership between all 3 levels of government, and this is where municipalities are going to have to step up. Traditionally, municipalities have engaged in the spaces that people expect them to: garbage collection, roads, planning decisions. What we have to be is a partner at the table with our federal and provincial government partners to be talking together about what we can do collaboratively. And municipalities, particularly large municipalities like London that can play a regional leader, need to be part of those discussions so that we can lead them. Because people, when I knock on doors, people feel impacted when their neighbor loses a job. They don't understand how they're participating in the successes of the global economy, though. They feel the hurt, but they don't feel or know how the successes are. And how we talk as policymakers about to include as many people as possible in our economic successes is one of the most important things I think we can do, not just for the resiliency of our own economy, but for the inclusion and to combat the anger and the frustration that individuals rightly have when they're impacted by changes beyond their control.
Hannah, do you, I mean, you've looked at this a lot, you've done a big report on innovation and a potential future for that here. Do you think politics has any of the answers that people are looking for these days?
I think they do. I think they need to start talking more to the people that it's actually impacting. And we talked a lot in our report about autonomy enhancing and making sure that everyone is included, so economically inclusive innovation. So this idea that right now we're seeing a lot of frustration, a lot of the anxiety that Susan and Josh talked about, that very quickly can bubble into anger. And I think we're at a sort of tipping point in London where we're trying to come up with ideas, and the City Hall has done phenomenal work trying to figure out what the next steps are to try and manage some of that anxiety and give people almost some hope for the future. Because right now we're talking to a lot of people that see no hope, that this might be as good as it gets, and it might get a lot worse.
I'm going to go in the audience in just 1 second, but you were in politics for a while, and I want to tap into your sense of the community with this one last question. I don't have to tell or remind anybody in this room that all of the anxiety, mistrust, all of those factors south of the border led to Donald Trump's becoming president of the United States. And I wonder if you see those factors here in that kind of intensity, which could bring about a similar result in this country.
I really believe that's quite possible. I mean, I see that a lot because I get out and about a lot, but it's not so much that there's a particular target. It's this feeling of helplessness, that we don't know what we can do. There's more money going around in this world than there ever has been. But it's not coming here. It's not coming to us, right? For some reason, we've developed these inabilities to be able to get those resources back into average people that are. I think that message is a really pivotal one. You might be Donald Trump and say, but you could be somebody else here as a mayor or somebody else that's saying that. But I do think the issue of where does the money go? We know it's being made and we know there's a lot of it. But why does it no longer become democratized and get into our communities? That's the real issue. And until that happens, people are going to get angry and angrier because they feel there's nothing they can do about it. So I don't think it's so much the target. It's the mood that's being created amongst people that's frustrating.
And Steve, could I just jump
Please,
in for a
yeah.
quick second? I think that it's really important to mention that one of the most vulnerable populations that are going to be impacted by the anger is racialized communities, and we're already seeing a little bit of that here, even in the city's consultations around whether or not London should be a sanctuary city. I'm seeing that anger, and in the anger, it's so easy to translate into xenophobia and into that fear of the other and into that fear of that cliche, the immigrants are taking our jobs and that kind of thing. And I really worry that the anxiety is going to turn into anger, and the anger is going to turn into bigotry.
Kelly, I want to ask you about something that Ontario is in the throes of sort of figuring out at the moment, and that is a pilot program of a sort of guaranteed annual income or a basic floor, you know, a basic amount of money that people would be transferred in order to live on. This has been debated for years and years, I mean, decades. What's your view on how well that might work to alleviate some of the issues we're talking about tonight?
Well, when you talk about poverty, at the very root of it, it's people don't have enough to survive, let alone to be able to contribute or to have a meaningful sort of existence in our community. And if you can remove that barrier through something like basic income and living wage, those are opportunities for people to, actually be more resilient, to be able to participate in their community and have a quality of life that they wouldn't otherwise have. And Tracy's done a lot of work in this area in terms of research.
Tracy, you know that the knock on this program, as I've understood it over the years, is that if you just hand somebody, let's say 10 grand a year, here's your basic income, you don't have to do anything for it. The argument is it saps them of any incentive to sort of get out there and find a better job. What do the facts say?
So, yeah, that's not the case, though. There has been a lot of work in this area, mainly from different kinds of basic income. Around the world, conditional cash transfers or unconditional cash transfers have been going on for years now. And the evidence is quite clear that they are very, very helpful in helping people work, meet their basic needs, get the education and training that they need. So it actually goes against that whole notion of this work disincentive that a lot of people seem to be afraid about.
Well, the first pilot program was, I think, 40 years ago in Manitoba.
Yes.
They called it Mincome.
That's right, and they did find a slight decrease, but the decrease was related to the fact that people actually went back to school. So if that is the problem, then I say that's a problem to have, because that's what we want, right? So yeah, there was a slight decrease, but Evelyn Forget was able to capture the dynamics of that and how people were actually going back to school, getting educated to go get jobs later.
But my point is, if every time somebody has done some research showing that this is a potential solution to the issues we're talking about here, why has there been so little political leadership over the years to implement this?
I would say that we actually have implemented it, that we actually have basic income architecture already within our existing constellation of income security programs. So for example, seniors. In the 1960s and 70s, we introduced a number of different income security programs for seniors. And in the 70s, we saw our poverty level for seniors go from almost 40% down to 1995, 4%. We almost eliminated poverty for the senior population by introducing a basic income. So we know it works. I almost sort of am a bit skeptical of the need to actually start another pilot because I know that it's been working around the world and it has been shown to work in Canada.
Yeah, we've got the seniors plan. We have a basic child
We do it for
grant
the
as
child
well.
benefits as well.
Yep.
So we should be equitable and ensure that an income floor is provided for all of our members of society.
Jacqueline, you sold on this idea?
The biggest issue that we have with poverty in London is the housing. So there's a differential for the income coming in for housing. So that's one of the things that London doesn't do very well. We have lots of administration systems for providing housing, but not a whole lot of housing. So we need to deal with that. The average cost of housing is much higher than people have for shelter amounts. So you have to provide either housing subsidies along with the income subsidies, or you're still not dealing with the issue because of the cost of housing and heating housing in Canada.
Okay, let's put a new issue on the table here. Mo, I take no joy in asking this question, but here we go. London has faced a few racist incidents over the last few months, including one this week. Spray paint on the doors of a high school. For those who don't know about it, do you want to fill us in on what happened?
So there's been a number of instances recently, and the most recent one you're referring to was at a secondary high school where there was a graffiti that was Islamophobic, and the other one at the same door, unfortunately, was so Islamophobic and homophobic at the same time. So it's very unfortunate. I don't think it's representative of the vast majority of us, but there is a small but very, very vocal minority that exists in our community that we have to flush out.
Are you able to, now remember this is a family program, are you able to say what was written on the doors?
Well, the one was Arabs are terrorists, and I think there was a spelling mistake, so they probably need to go back to the classroom. And I think the other part was, I'll err on the side of caution and not say the other, but it was a little bit of a homophobic slur, and I don't think it was appropriate at all.
Okay, let me get into this again. Susan, London has, among some, a reputation for being a bit white bread and a bit racist among some. Do you think that's a fair reputation?
Unfortunately, I do. I'd like to say otherwise, but in my conversations with friends of mine, I actually teach at Brusha as well. I have many women who wear the hijab who tell me that they're constantly told to go home. I was speaking with a woman the other day who said, as soon as you come to Canada, if you're a newcomer, or even if you've born here, the common knowledge, if you wear a hijab, don't even bother trying to get a job. You're not going to get through the front door. Nobody hires a woman who wears a hijab. That tells me that there's a problem. And we have to address it. And there's no amount of brushing it aside or sweeping it under the rug that's actually going to help. We have to tackle it.
Having said that, media sometimes can have the unfortunate effect of conveying that everybody is a certain way, and this is entirely, a city filled with racists. You don't want to leave that impression either, do you, Mo?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I think, let's be honest, I'm a city councilor who happens to be Black and Muslim. I represent a community that I think is diverse, but not as diverse as you'd hope or want to see in a community.
So the fact that you got elected says something.
I think that's one positive. I think, I don't think there were people who challenged and had some concerns raised around my ethnicity, but I think a lot of times people feel as if when we talk about racism, it's as if people are whining or complaining, when I don't think it's the case. I don't show up to the dentist and say, listen, tell me about everything that's wrong in my mouth that isn't a cavity or any wisdom teeth that needs to be pulled out. Just tell me about the good stuff. Because I don't think that's really going to get us anywhere. And it really is a matter of having that reality check. And I think we need to have that conversation and take actual steps that are tangible versus just another plan, another conversation, more talk in circles, and again, people in suits and bureaucrats making decisions or not taking no decisions at all that are effective.
How much have the job losses in Canada that we have experienced over the last decade and a half been as a result of manufacturing moving to lower wage jurisdictions as opposed to from automation, in your view?
It's a really interesting question. When we look at the data that we've got, it's hard to pinpoint exactly the causes behind this, but if you take the example of auto manufacturing, for example, so output in the auto sector in Ontario is exactly the same in 2015 as it was in 2000, but there are 30% less people working in the sector.
So they make as many cars
as
with
many
30%
cars
fewer
with
people.
30% less people and
fewer people.
Fewer people, exactly. And car companies were making billions of dollars of investments in machinery and equipment in the early to mid 2000s. So I mean, it's fairly clear that there's something going on there. And studies in the United States, in the context of Trump saying that I'm going to reshore all these jobs that we've lost to free trade deals, have actually found that about 85% of US manufacturing job losses are a result of technology and automation rather than free trade deals, which are a much smaller proportion of those job losses. So if we apply the same logic to Ontario, it might not be quite 85% due to technology, but I would say it's definitely 50, 60, 70% at least.
Armin, would you share that view that it's more automation than simply business looking for low wage?
Undoubtedly, I'm not going to dispute this, but I would just come back with three different very quick factoids. Number one, technology also creates jobs. It doesn't just destroy jobs. Number two, bring the technology on. 100 years ago, we had 40% of our workforce in agriculture. We now have less than 2%. And it's not because we're eating less. We're producing more food with fewer people. This is good news. Number three, the phenomenon we're talking about means that income inequality is of more importance for us to address than ever before because the fruits of growth are going to a smaller and smaller group of people that own the capital that are producing the work. So the owners of the robots are going to need to lean against the wheel with us a little bit more.
So that is more a political discussion as opposed to an economic
rather
discussion.
than a technophobic discussion, which I don't think is helpful.
Understood. Let's put the first of, I think, a few graphics we're going to bring up during the course of our discussion, because there have been some studies done into the risk of job loss as a result of automation over the next decade or two. And boy, oh boy, do they say vastly different things. Sheldon, let's bring this up. Here we go. This is the Brookfield Institute study, which suggests that over the next decade or two, there are as many as 42% of all of our jobs in Canada at risk. That would be 7.5 million jobs as a result of automation. That is a frightening-looking future. On the other hand, there is another study out of the OECD which suggests the number could be only 9% and only 1.6 million jobs at stake. So, Sunil, this is either a huge, cataclysmic future we are looking at or not. And we need to know which it is right now.
And nobody has a crystal ball, obviously. But I mean, even when we're looking at those two studies and the differences between them, one of them, the larger number of 7.5 million jobs, was using an occupation-based methodology. So what occupations are at high risk of automation, and those that are at high risk were counted as jobs that might well be lost in the next 2 decades. Whereas the OECD study was looking at tasks, kind of recognizing that all jobs, including mine, yours, Armin's, are bundles of tasks, essentially. So some of the things I do could be automated in the future, but that doesn't mean my job will be necessarily lost. And the important thing to keep in mind here is even if 7.5 million jobs are lost over the next 10 to 20 years, as Armin mentioned, many other jobs are going to come into existence and as a complement to technology or maintenance jobs.
Well, let me follow up with
jobs.
Armin on that. I mean, the reality is there will be jobs building the robots, servicing the robots, maintaining the robots, cleaning the robots, taking the robots out for lunch, whatever happens with robots. So, but we do wonder whether or not the jobs that will be lost through automation will be, in fact, replaced by whatever servicing of those new jobs is required. Do you have a sense of that?
I think we're not thinking about technology appropriately in this conversation, that if all we're talking about is automating tasks, then who knows what the future is. But technology includes artificial intelligence. It involves platform economies which connect people and things in brand new ways. and combine resource allocation in brand new ways that unlock value chains. It also includes artificial intelligence, which is permitting us to do things we could not have dreamed possible previously. So we're looking at all sorts of new jobs that I cannot now presage, but right now there are things that are jobs for AI trainers. There are extraordinary jobs in science and technology and engineering and medicine that were not possible to do before. We have huge possibilities on how to improve our lives. Where we have to pay attention to this is that public policy actually makes sure that the fruits of these benefits are better distributed than what we've seen in the last wave of economic growth that didn't involve automation, and that we actually make sure that public policy doesn't make things worse. For example, flooding what is now becoming an increasingly global market with temporary foreign workers.
I agree with some of what Armeen said, but I think the challenge is technology is likely to accelerate existing trends like income inequality and precarious work, because what we're seeing is these technology companies and these platforms, they're highly mobile in today's world. So it's really hard for a jurisdiction like Ontario to regulate a company like Uber and say, we're going to mandate that you pay your drivers a minimum wage. Because if Uber doesn't like that decision, they don't have to close up many factories or bring back all the cars that they purchased because they didn't buy any cars. Essentially, all they have to do is flip a switch in Silicon Valley, say Ontario's off the list of jurisdictions where Uber operates, and there, we're done.
Here's David Frum writing on the dangers of the Trump presidency. The grand utopian visions of the 19th century have passed out of fashion. The nightmare totalitarian projects of the 20th century have been overthrown or have disintegrated, leaving behind only outdated remnants, North Korea, Cuba. What is spreading today is repressive kleptocracy, led by rulers motivated by greed rather than by the deranged idealism of Hitler or Stalin or Mao. Such rulers rely less on terror and more on rule twisting, the manipulation of information and the co-optation, that's a good, I haven't heard that word before, of the elites. That's certainly a 21st century take on, the problems that we are in the midst of here. Is dystopian literature from the 20th century savvy enough to speak to that?
So let me make a case now for Aldous Huxley.
Go ahead.
So Brave New World makes a lot of sense with what you just read from David Frum's piece in the Atlantic. But why are the ordinary people in Brave New World okay with a repressive kleptocracy and with the authoritarian regime around them? Because of sensation, because they go to the feelies, right? What's our version of the feelies? It's our phones. It's our kind of
reality
it's virtual
sets.
reality. It's our passive consumption and material comfort.
Amusing ourselves to death.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
The Postman remains very relevant, I think. But the idea here is that we're okay with all that because we can, with outrage, bang away on our $800 phones about it. But that kind of lulls us, I think, into a state where these sorts of tendencies can take place.
Which is why, among other things, it's a good thing that people are reading books, whether they help you with the current situation or
Absolutely.
not. Because any time spent reading books is time not spent on social media or buying stuff.
Yeah.
Unless you're
which
reading
I
it on
think-
your phone.
Even
But even
then,
that's
it's a
okay.
different rhythm, yes.
No,
So-
see, I don't think it is.
All right.
I've given up all technology between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. for Lent. Okay? And so I'm in the middle of this.
You're looking pure.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's the makeup. I'm in the middle of this fantastic Japanese epic murder novel called 6-4. I'm halfway through, and I've put it down for the next 40 days because I'm only reading it on my phone. And I'm reading Graham Greene right now. I'm reading physical books. There is something actually, we're embodied selves, right?
actually
There's
less
something
pure than you.
physical about it.
No, I like books, but I read, and the phones are too irritating for me because the screen is too small. But I can read on an iPad. I do think that the rhythm of reading on something of reasonable size, even if a physical book is the best thing, it's still better than the constant chirping of
Agreed.
tweets.
Yeah, it's slowing
and
down.
and the frivolity and narcissism of Facebook. It would. To understand it, though, the books may not be the best place. I think that for people, the kind of people who are watching this show, who read books, to understand how Trump can be in power and how he can still have a fan base when what he's saying is so obviously false to us, you have to turn to other media, starting with reality TV, to understand why the kind of people like Donald Trump. You have to look at Duck Nation or whatever it's called. You have to find reruns of Dynasty. That's it. Honey Boo Boo. This is a whole different way of thinking, and I think one of the reasons that people who do read books are so gobsmacked by Trump's election and by his cabinet is we have no understanding of people who think like this, unless we're related to them.
So I think if I could build off that very good point, which I fully agree with, there are very good books that I would recommend, frankly, in place of reading Huxley, Orwell et al. for kind of Trumpian reasons. No, I would read J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy.
Oh, yeah.
I would read Charles Murray's Coming Apart. I would read the most recent issue of Commentary has a great essay by Nicholas Eberstadt that basically speaks to what he calls people in the bubble. And that includes us, right? And it's basically a hard economic analysis of lower middle class America.
Yeah. Nick was on this program last night talking about that.
You're kidding.
No, I kid you not. Good timing.
Yeah, no kidding.
Good timing.
It's a very good. It's a very good essay. But that's the kind of, I think, thoughtful reading away from the chirp that we should be doing. I read Hillbilly Elegy back in the fall when it came onto everyone's radar because of the election, and I was amazed to kind of explore the lives of people far beyond us who feel kind of left behind in a globalized economy, feel outraged and belittled for their beliefs and their practices, and they're turning, for lack of a better option, to someone that they think is going to.
But I hate to tell you, you know, I do have to hate to tell you. I don't know how old you are, but you're a woman of a certain age and of a certain education, and most people like you in the United States voted for Donald Trump.
Because they thought it was in their self-interest. This is why I think the book that I actually turned to after the election was Catch-22, which suddenly, in this world of alternative facts, it made more sense than it used to. I think that 1984 and Brave New World are always worth rereading, but they're not good models. Or another one.
Not good models for now?
For now, because the dissidents will always lose. These are completely controlled worlds. Winston Smith loses. In Brave New World, the dissident ends up hanging himself. Because they're under constant surveillance and because the authorities are really smart. So that induces despair, as does another one that I recommend, sort of related to what Randy says, E.M. Forster's novella, The Machine Stops, where the world is, people are completely dependent on machines who provide all of their physical needs, and the machines start to wind down. If you've ever considered getting a smart house, read The Machine Stops first. But it does give you a sense that Donald Trump doesn't seem to have of how complicated and interconnected our world is, and that's a good thing to remember.
In our last minute, I want one more recommendation from you. We've talked about how maybe 1984, in Sue Ann's view, is not the book to read at this moment to appreciate the dystopian nature of our times. What would you suggest instead?
I would say probably Coming Apart by Charles Murray, but then forget it all and read Elena Ferrante. Read the Neapolitan Quartet, those 4 novels about 2 poor girls growing up in Italy in the 1950s. Literature should be a place of repose and of recalibration, to kind of leave aside the loud, hard world for a moment, and then you'll be refreshed and reanimated, your imaginative sympathy re-engaged to return into this world of ours.
For that, I would turn to a novel by a Canadian, and I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. It's Emily St. John, or possibly St. John Mandel, Station 11, which is in part about a post-apocalyptic world.
Yes.
But it's a very Canadian post-apocalyptic world where people, most of them, not all, are trying to do their best and to rebuild society, and they're in a traveling theater troupe. Also, to understand where we are now, Gary Trudeau's Huge. His cartoons of Trump starting more than 30 years ago when Trump was just another New York slumlord.
That's a tremendous recommendation.
He is a guy who gets Trump. I wish I paid more attention 30 years ago.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those conversations in their entirety at tvo.org. That's the website. On our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda. And thanks to our 8 p.m. nightly Twitter live stream on our Periscope page at periscope.tv/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit tvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.